What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Last Word Sports Podcast. Sorry for the delay. It's been a couple days. We were out of town on a Christmas vacation, but we're back now, back in business, ready to get rolling with some more videos. So tonight we're going to be talking about the Wildcard weekend playoff games in the NFL that we just saw. And I just want to start off by saying, wow, that was an incredible week. All these games were super fun to watch. The game with the greatest point differential was Eagles-Seahawks, which was still an 8-point game. So all the games were close, all the games were fun, lots of upsets. Let's dive right into it. So we'll start off with Bills-Texans, the first game of the weekend on Saturday. The 5-seeded Bills traveled to Houston to take on the Texans, the 4th seed, and I personally thought that the Bills were going to win this game. To be honest with you, my Last Word colleagues convinced me to pick the Texans in our Instagram post, and luckily we got it right. If you check out our Insta, The Last Word PC, you'll see that we picked the Texans to win straight up and to cover the spread of 2.5 points. But dang, in the third quarter, this did not look like the Texans were going to cover. I mean, the first half was just all Bills. I got to say, the Texans managed to come back from a 16-0 deficit in the third quarter, and it's really tough for Bills fans, whose last playoff win was in like 1995 or something. I feel bad for them, but at the same time, the Texans really played terrible for an entire half of this game, and it was a huge comeback victory, showed a ton of heart. Deshaun Watson was incredible in the second half, made great play after great play. Third down passes, I think there was a third and like 18 or something that he converted with a little dump down. He was consistently making plays. There was a third and long in overtime where two Bills players, I thought, had sacked him. I thought the Texans' drive was over, and somehow Watson miraculously spun out of it. If you guys haven't seen this play, you should definitely look it up. Tossed off a little check down for 8 yards, and the guy ran like 25 yards down to the Bills' 10, and that was the game that kicked a field goal in overtime. But the Texans were just incredible in their comeback. But I want to reiterate, they can't come out flat in the first half against the Chiefs next week, because the Chiefs are not the Buffalo Bills, okay? The Bills are they're very well coached. They're kind of the opposite of the Texans. They don't really have a ton of talent, especially on the offensive side of the ball. Their defense is very stout, but it showed up in the second half, because in the first half, the Bills had to settle for a lot of field goals. They kicked 3 field goals. If they'd converted those, they get up, 28-0? This game's over. Texans don't have a chance coming back in the third quarter. Instead, they got up 16-0 because they had to settle for 3 field goals. And their only touchdown in the first half, I want to say their only touchdown of the game was a trick play, a pass that John Brown, the receiver, threw to Josh Allen, the quarterback, who ran it in for a touchdown. And it was a beautifully drawn play, very well executed. And the Bills, they executed well in the first half, but they just didn't have the same talent as the Texans. And you saw it with the pocket consistently collapsing on Josh Allen. He took a lot of sacks. Josh Allen was just generally inaccurate in this game. He finished 24 of 46 with no touchdown passes. You know, he had some nice moments. And the cool thing with Josh Allen is his arm is just so spectacular that he challenges defenses vertically. He'll just throw up these 50-yard jump balls. So you get everybody playing. They'll put 4 safeties back, and then he'll check down for 8 yards, and the guy will run for 20 after the catch. But at the end of the day, he's just too inaccurate for their offense to be really good at this point in his career. I like what he does with his legs. Josh Allen's a great runner, and he's very versatile, but he's got to become more accurate if the Bills want to win playoff games in the future. There was I think even a screen pass on like a third and long where Josh Allen just missed the guy. There was nobody there, and it was just a bad throw. But in the first half, it really looked like the Bills were going to beat the crap out of the Texans in Houston, because Bill O'Brien coached terribly. They're the opposite of the Bills. They have a very weak coach and fantastic players. Talent-wise, I mean, the Texans have Deshaun Watson, who's a phenomenal quarterback, DeAndre Hopkins, one of the best receivers in the NFL. Watson in this game, I want to say in the first half, he was like 4 of 8 passing or something. The Texans had 60 yards of offense in the first half. That's just embarrassing. I know the Bills have the second best defense in the NFL in terms of like points per game allowed, but still, a home playoff game, you scored 0 in the first half, you have 60 yards. I mean, the Texans just can't come out flat like this against the Chiefs, because the Chiefs are better coached. Andy Reid off the bye is one of the best coaches ever if you look up his record after bye weeks. And at the end of the day, the Texans will not win if they score 0 points in the first half against the Chiefs. I actually think the Chiefs are going to win by double-digit points, but that's a topic for another day. This game, though, the story of this was the heart of the Houston Texans because down 16-0, they totally could have quit, and Deshaun Watson just put this team on his back and willed them to victory. He started off with a touchdown run where he got hit by, I want to say, 3 Bills defenders at about the 5-yard line. He was running from the 20, ran 15 yards, got hit at the 5-yard line by, I want to say, 3 Bills defenders, and just muscled his way to the goal line, all heart. Get a touchdown. They get a 2-point conversion too. They make it 16-8. And then the fourth quarter was all Bills too. All Texans. Deshaun Watson drove this team down the field over and over and over. Threw a 5-yard touchdown pass to Carlos Hyde, and they took the lead with 4.5 minutes left. Now, the ending of regulation of this game was crazy because the Bills were down 3 points with like 2.5 minutes left, and they had the ball at like the Houston 30. And Josh Allen takes a sack, and then he gets like an intentional grounding penalty. And so they're like 4th and 27 from like the 50, and they still have 2 or 3 timeouts. And so they could have punted it down to like the Houston 1, but instead they go for it on 4th and 27. Josh Allen takes another sack, and it was just like, what are you doing? But good old Bullet Bill O'Brien, tried his best to make the Texans lose this game because they had the ball in Buffalo territory. They're up 3 with about 1.5 minutes left, and the Bills have to use most of their timeouts to stall Houston on this last drive, right? After they got the ball after Josh Allen was sacked on 4th down. And the Texans, I want to say, ran the ball up the middle twice, and on 3rd down, they couldn't convert, and so they're 4th and 1. And instead of just kicking the field goal, going up 6 points, leaving the Bills with an inaccurate quarterback with little to no timeouts left, and, making them drive down the whole field and get a touchdown, Bill O'Brien goes for it on 4th and 1. They QB sneak and don't get it, so the Bills got a field goal to force overtime. But once it got to overtime, it was pretty clear the Texans were going to win this game. They had all the momentum. They'd outscored the Bills in the second half, and the Texans did. Deshaun Watson was incredible down the stretch. DeAndre Hopkins burned Tre'Davious White multiple times in the second half, and they showed a lot of heart. But, and I want to say this one more time, if the Texans come out flat against the Chiefs, they will get slaughtered. I really think they might want to move on from Bill O'Brien. He's done a good job of winning them games in the regular season, and it's hard to fire a guy when you're winning division titles. And he actually won in the playoffs for I want to say, his second time in his career with Houston. But at the end of the day, I just don't think he's a good enough coach to give him a chance to compete for a title. And when they have talent like Deshaun Watson and DeAndre Hopkins, it seems almost like a waste, But I could be wrong, and the Texans could go on a run and win the Super Bowl. We'll just have to see. But I just don't really feel it this year from the Texans with Bill O'Brien. So I expect them to lose next round to the Kansas City Chiefs. All right, so on to the second wildcard game. This one I watched from start to finish, and I loved it. It was Titans-Patriots. If you guys don't know, I made 2 videos earlier in the year. One was the Tennessee Titans are Super Bowl contenders. Another was the New England Patriots won't win the Super Bowl. And boy, did Derrick Henry make me look good, because I was nervous, to be honest with you, when the Titans finished the year 9-7, snuck into the wild card, and had to play on the road. The last time the Patriots lost a wild card game at home, I want to say it was like 2000 or something to the Ravens. So it had been a while. They hadn't been in the wild card round since like 2009. That's how great Belichick and Brady are. They just get a first round bye every time. But this game was all Derrick Henry. I mean, the first drive, in the first half, it was really weird. Neither defense could stop the offense. And you thought this was going to be just a defensive shutout, and they came out, Patriots drive down easily, kick a field goal to start the game. Then the Titans drive down, Tannehill looks sharp, Derrick Henry looks sharp. I think Henry had 49 rushing yards on the first drive, and Tannehill threw a laser for a touchdown on 3rd down. Titans are up 7-3, and then the Patriots drove right down, did a nice little trick play where Tom Brady called out Julian Edelman's name, fooled the Titans defense, made him think he was in the wrong spot, and then they handed it off to him on a sweep. He just walked into the end zone for a touchdown easy. And so it's 10-7. And then after that, the defense is just locked in, and it was the craziest thing to see. I've been a huge fan of Ryan Tannehill. He led the league in passer rating this year. I think he was phenomenal down the stretch, and he's benefited a ton from play action and from Derrick Henry. But he's been super accurate too and great under pressure. But this was just not his game. Tannehill finished 8 of 15 for 72 yards with 1 touchdown and 1 pick. He had a couple key plays like a nice 3rd down conversion late in the game, but he was just generally inaccurate. And at the end of the day, though, Mike Vrabel coached this game great because he said, listen, I love Tannehill, I love what he's doing, but the Patriots have a phenomenal pass defense and they don't have a great run defense. And Tannehill had never played in the playoffs before. He had never won a game in Foxborough before. So he put the game on the shoulders, or rather on the legs, of his star running back, Derrick Henry, who led the NFL in rushing yards. I can't say enough about how great this guy has been down the stretch. 211 rushing yards against the Houston Texans to seize the rushing crown in Week 17. He had 34 carries for a $182 and a touchdown against the Patriots. There was one drive where he literally had all 75 yards for the Titans on that drive. It was crazy. So at the end of the second quarter, the Patriots kicked a field goal, and then the Titans did a nice little 2-minute drill with a bunch of run plays, of course. Derrick Henry cruised into the end zone. Titans got up 14-13 at halftime. And then after that, both defenses were just locked in. I don't think the Patriots actually made it past the Titans' 40-yard line on offense for the entire second half. They shut down the Patriots. And the Titans had some opportunities to score. They had one drive in the fourth quarter where they actually got into Patriots territory, and on 3rd and 3, Ryan Tannehill just dropped the snap. Very unlucky play. And so they were about 4th and 4. So Tony Romo, the announcer, was saying, you got to go for it. And Vrabel opted to punt. And a bunch of people were questioning them. They go, hey, you're a 6 seed. You got to go all out, take every chance you can to win. But Vrabel, I got to say, he outcoached Belichick at Belichick's game, and it was phenomenal to see. He's a former disciple of Belichick, played for the Patriots as a linebacker in the 2000s. And, man, he pulled the same stunt with the penalties that Belichick did against the Jets earlier this year. He ran off about an extra minute and a half of clock, punted it down with the first-team All-Pro punter, Brett Kern, and the Patriots couldn't go anywhere. And then they gave the ball back to the Titans. They ran it a few times. Ryan Tannehill converted a nice third-down pass, punted again, down the ball at the Patriots' 1-yard line with 15 seconds left in the game. Tom Brady threw a pick six, and it was over. And it just kind of, Tom Brady's pick six at the end of the game. You kind of felt bad for the guy a little bit, such a legend, potentially throwing the last pass of his career in a Patriots uniform as a pick six in a playoff loss. But at the same time, he kind of just epitomized, it felt almost fitting for what the Patriots season had been like this year, just the offensive inconsistency. And the funny thing, too, was it wasn't necessarily a terrible throw by Brady. It was just deflected out the receiver's hands, bounced up into the air. Logan Ryan snatched it and ran it into the end zone because the receiver couldn't separate. And that's been the story for the Patriots all year. Their talent around Tom Brady has just been atrocious. Now, do I think Tom Brady's regressed? Absolutely. He's not the same guy he's been in the past. But he can still play at a high level. I mean, the talent around him has got to be the worst in the league. His offensive line isn't good. The running game is kind of abysmal, to be honest with you. Sony Michel's in the doghouse, and it's like, where is this guy? The receivers, N'Keal Harry's slow. He can't run. He's looking almost like a bust. Mohamed Sanu, he's averaging like 6 yards a catch. Their best player on offense outside of Tom Brady is Julian Edelman, who's like a 35-year-old slot receiver who leads the NFL in drops, and that came up big because when the Patriots were trying to drive down the field to win the game, Edelman dropped a key pass on 2nd and 6, and the Pats had to punt after an incompletion on 3rd down. So, even though I picked the Titans to win this game, despite a lot of flack from our resident Patriots fan, Charlie, Fletcher and I love the Titans. We love Derrick Henry. I love Ryan Tannehill. And we were right in this game, but it still just felt so shocking to see the Patriots lose in the first round of the playoffs. I mean, in my lifetime, I've never seen anything like it. I'm just so used to Belichick and Brady winning, but to be honest with you, it's quite refreshing to see them out of the playoffs. So again, huge props to Mike Vrabel and Derrick Henry, who had great games. And as for the Patriots, who knows what the future holds? They might draft a QB this year. Brady might leave, go to the Chargers or somewhere. Who knows? He seemed a little less confident in staying with the Patriots than he usually is. He's going to be an unrestricted free agent for the first time in his career. So keep an eye out on Brady and where he might go. The one thing that's probably for sure, though, is he's not going to retire. This dude can still play at a high level. He knows it, and he said he doesn't want to retire. He loves the game of football. All right, so moving on to the NFC playoff games. Now, the Vikings played the Saints, and this game was unbelievable for me because I can't say anybody that I know legitimately picked the Vikings to win this game. I mean, the Saints were such a great team. Rarely do you see a team with a 13-3 record playing in the wildcard round as a 3 seed. And going into this game, the Saints were super hot. They had won, 3 games in a row to end the season with victories over Tennessee. And dating back to that, they had won 6 of their last 7. Their only loss at home to the San Francisco 49ers, the 1 seed, by 2 points. So Saints are a great team. And the Vikings, while they were good, they were 10-6, solid record, playoff team. Their best victory all season was probably against the Cowboys. I mean, they really hadn't beaten anybody who was in the playoffs. And so they lost to the Packers twice, and I think the Packers are kind of overrated. And Kirk Cousins, the quarterback of the Vikings, even though he's great against bad teams, he's good statistically, he's super efficient, he's been terrible in the clutch and terrible in primetime throughout his career. I want to say he's 0-9 on Monday Night Football games. The dude has never won a Monday Night Football game. He had never beaten a team in his career with a winning percentage higher than 70. And on top of that, he had never won a playoff game before. So there were a lot of reasons to doubt the Vikings, especially considering the Saints had the greatest receiver in the NFL right now, Michael Thomas, and the Vikings had a bunch of injuries and weaknesses in their secondary. But somehow, some way, the Vikings won this game. I mean, the Saints set an NFL record for fewest turnovers in a season by a team this year, and they turned over the ball multiple times. Drew Brees, who's going to be a Hall of Fame quarterback, first ballot, one of the greatest to ever do it, he threw a pick at the end of the first half. It was so unlike him. They were driving down late in the game. They had the ball at like the Minnesota 20, and he fumbled. He got strip sacked by Hunter, too, the defensive end for the Vikings. So Brees was turning over the ball. Michael Thomas only had 7 catches for 70 yards, which is still a good game, but by his standards, that's very weak, especially considering how guys like Xavier Rhodes were getting burned by Deontay Harris. Drew Brees was honestly outplayed by his teammate Taysom Hill, and it was just so strange to see because the Saints said after the game, some of the players, they said, it just took us too long to wake up to really get into our rhythm. But at the end of the day, the Saints were winning 10-6 with 2.5 minutes left in the second half. Like, the Saints were really in this, and they had the ball. They were winning. And Brees threw a pick, and it was just the most shocking thing, and the Vikings capitalized. And Dalvin Cook, who's been great, he's been the engine for the Vikings offense all year, he really fueled this victory. Cook had 28 carries for 94 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was phenomenal. He pounded the rock for them, and they just went on the road and silenced the Superdome. It was unbelievable because the Saints now, for the 3rd year in a row, have lost a playoff game on the last play of the game. And the Vikings got up 20-10 in the 3rd quarter of this game. Still, the Saints stormed back and forced overtime. 2 overtime playoff games in the same weekend. What more could we NFL fans ask for? But once it got to overtime, Vikings won the coin toss, and Kirk Cousins just became unbelievable. I mean, he had been solid all game, but he didn't have any touchdown passes. He finished the game 19 of 31 for 242 with 1 touchdown and no picks. The touchdown he tossed in overtime to win the game. And so good stat line, but not exceptional. And going into overtime, he had no touchdowns. But then he turned it on. And it's weird because he hasn't been a clutch player throughout his career. And then in overtime, he just threw the greatest pass I've ever seen to Adam Thielen next to my boy Eli Manning's dime to Mario Manningham in the Super Bowl against the Patriots. But that's another story. Kirk just threw the sky ball and dropped it in the bucket for Adam Thielen. Just an unbelievable throw, something like 46 yards. Brought it down to the Saints' 2-yard line. And after that, it was over. Threw a beautiful pass on a fade to Kyle Rudolph. Touchdown. For some reason, the Saints were playing 0 at the goal line. Cousins saw Rudolph out there manned up against a corner who he had 6 inches on. Rudolph wasn't the primary read, but he just checked to Rudolph and said, listen, we're throwing you this fade. Now, it did kind of look like an offensive pass interference, and a lot of people said it was, and it was a no call. And I can get, why people are upset. There was a little bit of a push-off. It's hard to tell if I would have called it pass interference or not. And at the end of the day, though, Saints fans just have to get over the refs. And the Saints, at some point you have to take more responsibility. Because after the game, I want to say Drew Brees said something like, this is all on the refs, or one of the Saints players did. And that attitude, I think is part of why they haven't been able to reach the championship the past 3 years, because they had to be more responsible. At the end of the day, yes, there may have been a penalty on that last play with a push-off for Kyle Rudolph, okay? But you shouldn't have been down 20-10 at home to the Minnesota Vikings. You shouldn't have scored 20 points at home against a Vikings defense that was depleted in the secondary. So huge props to Mike Zimmer and Kirk Cousins for going on the road, getting a dub in a game that nobody expected them to win. We did pick Minnesota to cover the spread in this game as 7.5-point underdogs, which we thought was a lot. But we picked the Saints to win straight up, and I really can't say I saw any chance of the Vikings winning this game going in. So props to them. Who knows? They might be able to upset the Niners this week too. I mean, nobody's going to pick them again, but we'll just see what happens. All right, so the final playoff game of the weekend was Seahawks at Eagles. And I have to admit, I didn't watch a ton of this game, but I caught a lot of the highlights, watched a good chunk of it, and it was the exact same score as the Seahawks-Eagles game that was played in Week 12. And that's really funny because the game was played at Philly then, and it was played at Philly here, and rarely do you see two games played in the same location between the same two teams have the exact same outing. I mean, so many times you'll see a team crush another team at one point in the season, and then a couple weeks later, the team who lost will, sees a huge victory. It's just teams change so much in a few weeks, and both of these teams were looking very different in this game than they were in Week 12. And it's really unfortunate. You hate to see it. On, I want to say the first or second drive of this game for the Eagles, Carson Wentz, their starting quarterback, went down. He was really hot. He had led the Eagles to 4 straight victories to win the division, seal a playoff spot, and he went down to start this game. And that was really tough. It was a kind of a nasty hit from Jadeveon Clowney. I don't think he was trying to injure him, though. It wasn't any foul intention. It was just Wentz fell back weird, and it looked like he was running. Clowney hit him in the head, and Wentz got a concussion. But the Seahawks played nicely. They played well, and a lot of Seahawks fans have been really cheering because they got a road playoff victory, and they're headed to Green Bay this week. But at the same time, I can't say I was that impressed with the Seahawks. This is an Eagles team that was already super banged up, missing a ton of players. I've said it a ton of times in our past videos. Missing a ton of receivers, missing their top running back, missing their top Zach Ertz. He played, but he has like a cracked rib or something. I mean, their number one receiver right now is Greg Ward, who was cut multiple times before. Defense has a lot of injuries. And Carson Wentz, who was kind of keeping the ship afloat, went down early in this game. And it was really fun to see Josh McCown play in the playoff game. I love Josh McCown. I think people don't really give him enough credit. He's actually had some good moments throughout his career. And it was really fun to see McCown play his first playoff game as a 40-year-old guy. Just go out there and try his hardest, And my brother was a huge fan of his when he was at the Jets a couple years ago. So we like Josh McCown in our family. And it's sad to see him retire, leave the league. But he left it all out on the field. Props to Josh McCown. The Eagles were just out-talented in this game. To be honest with you, I didn't think the Seahawks played that great. Scoring 17 points was not super impressive. Russell Wilson had a pretty nice outing, and you usually don't see him throw for a ton of yards, but he actually was 18 of 30 for 325, which is very good yards per attempt. He only had 1 touchdown pass, but he had no interceptions. He had 45 rushing yards, led the team. This was the really concerning thing. And I know the Eagles have a very stout run defense, but Travis Homer had 11 carries for 12 yards, and Marshawn Lynch had 6 carries for 7 yards, and that's unacceptable. In the playoffs, you have to be able to run the football to win the game, especially in cold weather. They're going up to Lambeau this week, and as good as Russell Wilson is, they can't just ask him to carry this team because the run game was such a huge part of their offense before Chris Carson went down. I mean, he was a 1,000-yard rusher, and he missed like the last 2 or 3 games of the season. He was great. They relied on a ton of play action, and without him, the Seahawks really have no rushing threat. I love Beast Mode. I love Marshawn Lynch. I love his Skittles, but he's just not the same guy that he was, and he's getting up there in age. Travis Homer has had some nice moments this year, but he's a rookie from Miami, Florida, 6th-round pick. You can't expect too much of him. And so at the end of the day, the Seahawks are going to have to find their groove in the run game if they want to win going forward. DK Metcalf was the star of this game, though. He had an incredible performance, broke the rookie record for receiving yards in a playoff game. 7 catches for 160 yards and a touchdown. His 52-yard touchdown snag was unbelievable. his speed and size. I mean, this guy is just a freak of nature. Like, how he fell to the second round. I know he didn't have a great route running times at the combine and stuff, but this guy, he could be a defensive end, and he runs like a 4.3 40. He's insane. So, at the end of the day, this game was really probably won because of Wentz's injury. I honestly think the Eagles would have won this if Wentz had stayed healthy. Early in the year, the Eagles won 8-9-7 this season, and they had a lot of struggles early in the year with red zone inconsistency and turnovers, especially with a ton of injuries. And down the stretch, I know they didn't play great teams, but in their final 4 games, they really started to piece together. The offense was efficient in the red zone, and that was one of the reasons why they started winning a lot of these divisional games that they had lost earlier in the year. And against the Seahawks, Josh McCown just couldn't capitalize in the red zone. They had to settle for 3 field goals. No touchdowns, and that was tough. I think if they had Wentz, they could have capitalized on at least 1 or 2 of those drives that got deep into Seahawks territory and won this game, because the Seahawks really had no rushing attack for most of the game. The Seahawks defense is really perplexing too, because sometimes they'll just go out there and hold the other team to like 9 points, just lock somebody up. But they're too inconsistent for me, especially with some of the injuries that they've had. They've got nice players like Jadeveon Clowney, but I don't know. They let up 24 to the Panthers with Kyle Allen, 27 to the Cardinals, 26 to the Niners. So at the end of the day, the Seahawks defense isn't really good enough for them to rely on it to win championships. The offense is what makes this team roll. And Russell Wilson's a special player. In any other year without Lamar Jackson, he probably would have taken home the MVP. But I just don't think Russell Wilson is good enough to carry the Seahawks team to a championship with no running game and an average defense. So even though they beat the Eagles, I'm skeptical of them at the Packers. It's tough for me because I don't really like the Seahawks with a bunch of injuries and no running game, but I also don't really like the Packers, who haven't had a ton of huge victories against good teams this year. So it's tough for me. I'm not really sure who to pick in that game. Alrighty, so those are all 4 playoff games from the Wildcard weekend. It was a great week of football if you got to watch any of the games. All of them were close, all of them within at least 8 points, 2 overtime games, tons of fun. The teams that advanced were the Houston Texans, Tennessee Titans, Minnesota Vikings, Seattle Seahawks. We saw 2 6 seeds beat the quarterbacks who have the most touchdown passes in NFL history over their career. So that was pretty crazy. But overall, we picked most of these games right, to be honest with you. The last word, we got all 4 games right against the spread. The only game that we missed picking straight up was the Saints, who we picked to win. And to be honest with you, I think most people did. So if you want any more betting advice, you know where to come. The last word is nailing those picks with our expert formula. But thanks for watching. I'm Scott Gerberts. I'm your host. Thanks for listening to me talk about these playoff games. Hope you gained some insight. This has been The Last Word.